Captain Marcus Tank Rodriguez stared at the holographic display floating above his command chair and wondered, not for the first time, why the Galactic Humanitarian Council thought sending rescue ships without proper escorts was a brilliant idea. The bridge of the Mercy's hand hummed with the quiet efficiency of a crew that had pulled civilians out of more disasters than they cared to count, but today felt different. Today felt like the kind of different that usually ended with somebody getting shot at. Captain Lieutenant Zara Patches Okafor called from her medical station, her voice carrying that particular brand of optimism that only came from years of stitching people back together in impossible situations. I've got the medical bays prepped for about 300 refugees. Though knowing our luck, we'll probably end up with 400 and a small zoo. Tank nodded, suppressing a grin. Patches had earned her nickname during the Rigel 7 incident, when she'd literally patched a hull breach with medical bandages and sheer bloody-mindedness. The woman could perform surgery in zero gravity during a meteor shower and still find time to crack jokes about her patients' questionable life choices. Boom, status on our defensive systems? Tank asked, turning to Sergeant Tommy Nakamura, who was lovingly polishing what appeared to be a small explosive device. All green, Cap, Tommy replied without looking up from his bomb. Though I still say we should have brought more of the fun stuff. Nothing says peaceful humanitarian mission like a proper deterrent. The Galactic Council specifically forbade any weapons beyond standard defensive arrays, Tank reminded him, though he was beginning to think Tommy's paranoia might be justified. Aye? And that's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed, Chief Engineer Riley Wrench O'Sullivan chimed in from her station, her Irish accent thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark my words, Captain, there's always some gobshite who thinks humanitarian workers are easy targets. Tank had to admit, Wrench had a point. In his 15 years of rescue operations, he'd noticed a disturbing trend among the galaxy's less civilized species. They seemed to think that ships marked with big red crosses were somehow less dangerous than proper warships. It was the kind of mistake that usually got corrected violently, but apparently some species were slow learners. The communication array chirped, and Tank's tactical officer, a young ensign who looked like he'd graduated from the academy about 5 minutes ago, straightened in his chair. Captain, we're receiving a distress signal from Kepler 442 billion. Multiple sources, sir. Looks like the situation down there is worse than our briefings indicated. Tank sighed. Of course it was. Because when had a simple evacuation ever stayed simple? Put it on speaker, ensign. The bridge filled with static, then voices speaking in panicked standard Galactic. Words like orbital bombardment and civilian casualties filtered through the interference, along with what sounded suspiciously like weapons fire in the background. Well, Patches said cheerfully, looks like we're not going to be bored today. Tank stood up, straightening his uniform jacket. All right, people. You know the drill. We go in, we get the civilians out, we don't start any fights we can't finish. And remember, we're representing Earth out here, so let's try not to embarrass the species. The Mercy's hand dropped out of hyperspace along with the rest of the small rescue fleet, and Tank immediately knew they were in trouble. The planet below was lit up like a festival, if festivals involved massive explosions and burning cities. And surrounding the planet, like vultures around a carcass, was a fleet of ships that definitely weren't there to help with the evacuation. Captain, the ensign's voice cracked slightly, were being hailed by the lead vessel. They're identifying themselves as the Vorthak Hegemony 4th Strike Fleet. Tank's blood went cold. The Vorthak were known throughout the galaxy for two things, their absolute ruthlessness in warfare and their complete disregard for galactic law. But they were the kind of species that gave evolution a bad name. On screen, Tank ordered, and found himself face to face with what looked like a cross between a lizard and a particularly unpleasant nightmare. The Vorthak commander's voice sounded like gravel in a blender. Human vessels, you will withdraw immediately. This system is under hegemony control. Tank took a deep breath and put on his best diplomatic smile. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Terran Rescue Service. We're here on a humanitarian mission authorized by the Galactic Council. We're only here to evacuate civilians. The Vorthak commander's laugh sounded like metal being shredded. There are no civilians, only enemies of the hegemony. And that's when Tank realized that today was definitely going to be one of those days. The next few seconds unfolded with the kind of crystal clarity that only came right before everything went completely to hell. Tank watched the Vorthak commander's scaled face twist into what might have been a smile, if smiles were designed to give children nightmares. The hegemony does not recognize your so-called galactic law, the commander hissed. Consider this a lesson in the reality of power. The transmission cut, and Tank had exactly enough time to think, oh shit, before the Vorthak fleet opened fire. The first salvo vaporized the hospital ship Good Samaritan in a ball of superheated plasma. 300 medical personnel and enough supplies to treat thousands of refugees simply ceased to exist, but replaced by expanding debris and the kind of silence that screamed louder than any explosion. Evasive maneuvers. Tank bellowed. But the rescue fleet hadn't been built for combat. They were flying medical centers and transport ships designed to save lives, not dodge military-grade weapons. The Mercy's hand shuddered as near misses from Vorthak plasma cannons boiled away chunks of her hull plating. Holy Mary, Mother of God, Wrench breathed from her engineering station. They're not even aiming for our weapons. They're going for maximum casualties. She was right. The Vorthak weren't trying to disable or capture. They were trying to kill every human in the system, and they were doing a thorough job of it. The transport ship New Hope took a direct hit to her refugee bays, taking 2,000 civilian evacuees with her. The supply vessel Charity simply disappeared in a flash of white light. Return fire. Tank ordered, though he knew it was pointless. Their defensive arrays were designed to discourage pirates and asteroid impacts, not fight a proper military engagement. With what? Boom Boom demanded, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by cold fury. Harsh language and medical supplies. Patches was working frantically at her station, her voice tight with controlled rage. I'm detecting survivors from the Good Samaritan. Maybe 40 people in escape pods. Tank watched through the viewscreen as Vorthak fighters methodically hunted down and destroyed every escape pod they could find. 40 people who had dedicated their lives to healing others, murdered for the crime of trying to help. Get us out of here, Tank ordered, his voice deadly quiet. Emergency jump, anywhere but here. But the survivors, the ensign started, are dead if we stay. Tank cut him off. We can't help anyone if we're scattered atoms. The Mercy's hand limped into hyperspace, but leaving behind the burning wrecks of 7 ships and the bodies of over 4,000 people whose only crime had been believing that the galaxy was civilized enough to respect humanitarian workers. In the medical bay, Patches was treating the handful of wounded they'd managed to pull aboard before the shooting started. Tank found her there 20 minutes later, her hands steady as she worked but her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. You know what the really funny part is, Captain? She said without looking up from her patient. We actually believed all that crap about galactic civilization. We thought the universe had grown up, become civilized. Turns out we were just projecting. Tank nodded, staring at the list of casualties scrolling across his personal display. Good people. People who'd signed up to save lives, not fight wars. People who'd trusted their government and the galactic community to protect them while they did the right thing. Patches, he said quietly, send a message to Earth Command. Full tactical report, complete casualty list, and recommend they upgrade our mission status. To what? Tank's smile was the kind that made smart people take several steps backward. From humanitarian rescue to next of kin notification. Because somebody's going to pay for this, and I have a feeling Earth's about to remind the galaxy why humans don't make very good victims. Boom Boom looked up from his explosives inventory, his face bright with anticipation. Does this mean we get to use the fun stuff now? Tommy, Tank said, still wearing that terrifying smile. I think Earth's about to show the Vorthak hegemony what fun stuff really means. The Mercy's hand continued toward Earth, carrying news that would change everything. Behind them, the Vorthak celebrated their easy victory over the weak humans, completely unaware that they'd just made the kind of mistake that species didn't usually survive. In the ship's communication array, an automated beacon was already transmitting toward Earth, carrying a simple message that would reach the Terran Defense Command in 72 hours. Rescue fleet destroyed. No survivors among other vessels. Vorthak hegemony responsible. Recommend immediate military response. It was the kind of message that tended to wake up sleeping giants. Admiral Victoria Iron Maiden Cross had been having a perfectly pleasant morning reviewing supply reports and pretending to care about the Senate's latest budget proposal when the message from the Mercy's hand arrived. She read it once, blinked, read it again, and then did something she hadn't done in her 30-year military career. She threw her coffee mug at the wall. "Get me the Joint Chiefs," she told her aide, a young lieutenant who had the good sense to look terrified. "Get me the President. And get me Colonel Peterson. Now, Museum T." The lieutenant practically sprinted out of the office, leaving Victoria alone with the kind of rage that had historically ended civilizations. 4,000 people. 4,000 humanitarian workers murdered for trying to save lives. The Vorthak had just crossed a line that humanity didn't even know it had. 20 minutes later, her office was full of the most dangerous people on Earth, and they all looked about as happy as she felt. General Harrison from the Army was reading the casualty report with the expression of a man planning multiple funerals. Admiral Chen from the Navy was already pulling up fleet deployment schedules. And Colonel Peterson, commander of the 1st Terran Shock Marines, was sitting perfectly still in a way that suggested he was mentally calculating how many Vorthak he could kill with his bare hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded biblical devastation, "we have a problem. The Vorthak hegemony just declared war on humanity. They just don't know it yet." "Ma, AM," General Harrison spoke up, with respect, "the Galactic Council will expect us to file a formal complaint and request mediation. Standard diplomatic protocol." "General," Victoria interrupted, "the Vorthak just murdered 4,000 of our people for the crime of trying to save lives. I'm thinking we skip the strongly worded letters and go straight to the part where we explain why that was a mistake." Colonel Peterson leaned forward, and everyone in the room instinctively moved back slightly. Rex Peterson was the kind of man who made career soldiers nervous, built like a walking tank and with the personality of a particularly motivated shark. "Admiral," he said, his voice carrying a Texas drawl that somehow made everything sound more threatening, "I've been waiting my whole career for someone to give me a good reason to show the galaxy what human Marines can do when we're properly motivated. I do believe the Vorthak just provided that reason." Victoria smiled, and her aide made a mental note to request a transfer. "Colonel, how long would it take you to prepare for a full-scale assault on Vorthak space?" "Ma, AM, my boys have been ready since the day they signed up. Give me 72 hours to load the equipment, and I'll show the Vorthak why Earth doesn't produce very good victims." Admiral Chen cleared her throat. "The Third Fleet is currently conducting exercises near the Outer Rim. I could have them repositioned and ready for combat operations within the week." "Make it happen," Victoria ordered. "And I want the Righteous Fury as our flagship. If we're going to war, we might as well do it in style." The Righteous Fury was humanity's newest dreadnought, bristling with enough weapons to sterilize a small moon and protected by armor plating that had been tested against everything short of a direct hit from a star. She was the kind of ship that made other species admirals wake up in cold sweats, and Victoria was looking forward to introducing her to the Vorthak. "What about the Galactic Council?" General Harrison asked. "They'll demand we follow proper procedures." Victoria's laugh could have frozen helium. "The Galactic Council can file a complaint." after we're done explaining to the Vorthak why attacking rescue workers is bad for their health. Besides, I seem to recall that galactic law includes something about the right of proportional response. Is this proportional? The general asked. Colonel Peterson's grin was the kind that appeared in other species' nightmares. General, the Vorthak killed 4,000 humanitarian workers. I figure we're being proportional if we only wipe out their entire military and maybe their industrial capacity. We're being downright merciful if we leave their planet habitable. Victoria nodded approvingly. Exactly. We're not monsters, after all. We'll leave them enough infrastructure to surrender properly. The meeting continued for another hour, with discussions of troop deployment, supply lines, and the finer points of making an entire species regret their life choices. By the end, Earth's war machine was spinning up with the kind of efficiency that had historically made the galaxy's other military powers very nervous. As the others filed out, Colonel Peterson lingered behind. "Admiral," he said, "there's one thing you should know. My Marines have been following the news about the rescue fleet for years. They know those people personally. Well, some of them have friends and family in the rescue service." Victoria raised an eyebrow, and? Peterson's smile was absolutely terrifying. I'm not sure the Vorthak understand what they've done. They didn't just attack Earth's military. They attacked the people our military swore to protect. That's not just a declaration of war. That's personal. As Peterson left, Victoria turned to stare out her window at the shipyards orbiting Earth, where humanity's industrial might was already beginning to shift from peaceful production to something altogether more final. The Vorthak thought they'd destroyed a handful of weak rescue ships. They were about to learn the difference between Earth's humanitarian workers and Earth's actual military. It was going to be an educational experience they wouldn't survive. The Terran fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Vorthak space with all the subtlety of a supernova, which was exactly the impression Admiral Cross had been going for. Leading the formation, the dreadnought Righteous Fury was a 2-kilometer monument to humanity's talent for creative violence, bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet and backed by 47 other ships that looked like they'd been designed by people who took warfare personally. On the bridge of the Righteous Fury, Victoria stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the tactical display populate with Vorthak defensive positions. The enemy had clearly been expecting them, which was fine. Victoria had been looking forward to a proper fight. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're being hailed by the Vorthak home fleet. They're demanding we withdraw immediately." "Put them through," Victoria ordered, settling into her command chair with the satisfaction of someone about to deliver very bad news. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of a Vorthak dreadnought and the scarred face of what was obviously their fleet commander. The alien scaled features twisted into what Victoria assumed was meant to be intimidating. "Human fleet," the Vorthak admiral hissed, "you will withdraw from hegemony space immediately or face the consequences. We have destroyed your pathetic rescue vessels. Do not think your warships will fare better." Victoria's smile was the kind that made insurance companies nervous. "Admiral, I'm Victoria Cross of the Terran Defense Force. I believe you have something that belongs to us. We have nothing of yours, human. Actually, you do. You have about 4,000 people's worth of payback coming, and I'm here to collect with interest." The Vorthak admiral's laugh sounded like gravel in a garbage disposal. "You bring 40 ships against the might of the hegemony? We have 200 vessels in this system alone." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I noticed that. It should make for an interesting test of our new weapons systems." Meanwhile, Colonel Peterson was aboard the assault transport Semper Fi, addressing his Marines in the kind of pre-battle speech that would have made ancient warriors weep with envy. "Listen up, you beautiful, violent bastards," Peterson began, his voice carrying clearly through the transport's cargo bay. "The Vorthak think they can murder our rescue workers and get away with it. They think humans are weak because we spend so much time trying to save lives instead of taking them. The Marines listened with the focused attention of predators being shown pictures of prey. They're about to learn the difference between humanity's humanitarian workers and humanity's professional killers. We're going down to that planet, and we're going to give them a free lesson in why Earth doesn't produce good victims. Private Williams, a young Marine from Detroit who looked like he could bench press a small car, raised his hand. "Sir, what's our rules of engagement?" Peterson's grin could have been used to strip paint. "Williams, our rules of engagement are very simple. If it shoots at you, shoot back. If it surrenders, accept the surrender and treat prisoners according to galactic law. If it's a civilian, protect it. And if it's wearing a Vorthak military uniform and was anywhere near our rescue fleet when it got shot up." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Use your best judgment." The Marine's answering roar could have been heard 3 decks away. Back on the Righteous Fury, Victoria was ending her conversation with the Vorthak Admiral in the traditional human fashion. "Admiral," she said pleasantly, "I want you to understand something. Earth tried diplomacy. We sent rescue workers to save lives and you murdered them. So now we're going to try something we're much better at." "And what is that, human?" Victoria's smile widened. "Customer service. We're here to address your complaint about our rescue fleet. Personally." Well, the transmission cut, and Victoria turned to her weapons officer. "Commander, please demonstrate our customer service philosophy to the Vorthak home fleet." "With pleasure, Admiral." The Righteous Fury opened fire, and the Vorthak learned their first lesson about human military engineering. When humans built something designed to kill other humans, they tended to over-engineer it. The Dreadnought's main batteries could have reduced a small moon to constituent atoms, and against Vorthak capital ships, they performed exactly as advertised. The first Vorthak vessel simply ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. The second managed to return fire before suffering the same fate. The third actually got its shields up before discovering that human weapons designers had anticipated that possibility. Within the first 10 minutes of combat, the Vorthak home fleet had been reduced from 200 ships to approximately 50, with the survivors frantically attempting to withdraw to what they hoped was a safe distance. "Admiral," the tactical officer reported, "the enemy fleet is attempting to retreat." Victoria nodded. "Let them. Someone needs to survive to tell the rest of the hegemony what happened here." On the planet's surface, Colonel Peterson and his Marines were providing their own demonstration of human military philosophy. The Vorthak ground forces had been expecting a traditional orbital bombardment followed by a standard planetary assault. Instead, they got something that had never been tried before in galactic warfare, a full-scale human amphibious landing conducted by people who were personally offended. "Boom, boom," Peterson called over the comm as his Marines advanced through what had been Vorthak defensive positions. "How are those defensive installations coming along?" Tommy Nakamura's voice crackled back, bright with professional satisfaction. "Just finished redecorating their command bunker, Colonel. Turns out Vorthak architecture isn't rated for human explosives." The Vorthak were learning that human military doctrine was based on several thousand years of humans fighting other humans, and humans had gotten very good at killing things that didn't want to die. Their defensive positions, designed to withstand conventional galactic warfare, simply weren't built to handle an enemy that approached combat as a combination of advanced science and personal insult. By the end of the first day, the Vorthak homeworld's military infrastructure had been reduced to historical significance, and Colonel Peterson was accepting the surrender of the surviving garrison commanders. "You fight without honor," one of the Vorthak officers hissed as he handed over his weapon. Peterson looked at him with the expression of a man who had just been told that water was wet. "Officer, honor is a luxury we gave up about the time your people started shooting at our medics. We're not here to fight with honor. We're here to win." Caban. The Vorthak officer stared at him with what might have been the first glimmer of understanding his species had shown. "What do you want?" he asked. Peterson's smile was almost gentle. "Unconditional surrender. And an explanation to your people about why attacking human rescue workers is bad for their continued existence." 3 weeks into what historians would later call the Vorthak educational campaign, the galaxy was beginning to understand that humanity had some very specific ideas about proportional response. The Vorthak hegemony, which had controlled 17 star systems and considered itself a major galactic power, was rapidly discovering that there was a significant difference between being a regional threat and picking a fight with a species that had spent most of its evolutionary history trying to kill itself. Captain Tank Rodriguez found himself back in space, but this time he was commanding the heavy cruiser Just Cause instead of a medical ship, and his crew had been supplemented with enough firepower to level a city. The Mercy's hand had been repaired and returned to service, but Tank had requested a transfer to something with more guns and fewer regulations about shooting back. Captain Patches called from her new position as Tactical Medical Officer. "I'm reading Vorthak civilian evacuation ships heading out of the Zirian system. They appear to be carrying non-combatants." Tank nodded, studying the tactical display. The Vorthak were learning slowly and painfully that humans made a distinction between military targets and civilians. It was a distinction that many galactic species found confusing, since it meant that humans could be absolutely merciless toward enemy soldiers while simultaneously risking their lives to protect enemy civilians. "Let them go," Tank ordered, "and transmit our medical assistance protocols. If they need help with their wounded, we're still in the rescue business." Boom Boom looked up from his weapons console, where he was lovingly calibrating a new torpedo guidance system. "Cap, you realize we're offering to help the same species that tried to kill us 3 weeks ago." "Tommy," Tank replied, "that's exactly the point. We're not here to commit genocide. We're here to teach a lesson about the difference between soldiers and medics." The lesson was apparently a difficult one for the Vorthak to learn. Their military doctrine was based on the assumption that all enemies were equally valid targets, which was why they'd shot up the rescue fleet in the first place. The concept that humans would destroy their military while simultaneously protecting their civilians was apparently breaking their strategic planning computers. "Sir," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Cross. The Vorthak High Command has requested a ceasefire for negotiations." Tank's laugh had gained a sharp edge over the past few weeks. "How generous of them. What are their terms?" "They're offering to return to pre-war boundaries and pay reparations for the rescue fleet." "And our response?" The communications officer's grin was pure predator. The Admiral's exact words were, "Tell them we'll accept nothing less than unconditional surrender and a complete restructuring of their military command. Also, they're paying for the rescue fleet, the military response, and a very expensive education about galactic humanitarian law." Patches snorted with amusement. "I love it when the Admiral gets diplomatic." The Battle of Vorthak Prime had been the turning point, though battle might have been a generous term for what was essentially a 3-hour demonstration of human military engineering. The Vorthak had fortified their homeworld with everything they had: orbital defense platforms, fighter squadrons, ground-based missile systems, and enough troops to conquer a small galaxy. Colonel Peterson had looked at their defenses and described them as cute. The assault had begun with what Peterson cheerfully called clearing the neighborhood. Human fighters, flown by pilots who had trained in combat simulators based on actual human military history, had swept the orbital space clean in about 20 minutes. The Vorthak pilots, trained in the elegant, formal combat styles favored by most galactic militaries, found themselves facing humans who fought like their lives depended on it, because they did. The thing about humans, Peterson had explained to his staff as they watched the fighter combat on the tactical displays, is that we've been trying to kill each other efficiently for about 10,000 years. We've gotten very good at it. The ground assault had been even more educational. Vorthak defensive doctrine was based on holding fortified positions and wearing down attackers through attrition. It was a perfectly reasonable strategy against any normal galactic military. Unfortunately, Peterson's Marines weren't normal by any definition of the word. They were humans who had been personally offended, equipped with weapons designed by a species that considered warfare a form of applied engineering, and led by officers who approached military problems with the same creativity that had gotten humanity to the stars in the first place. The Vorthak discovered that their carefully prepared defensive positions had been designed to stop conventional attacks, but not humans who thought that impossible was just another word for challenging. When frontal assault proved difficult, Peterson's Marines went around, over, under, and in one memorable case, through a mountain to reach their objectives. "Sir," Wrench's voice came over the comm from her position with the engineering corps, "we've finished repairing the Vorthak power grid. It now produces 30% more power and doesn't explode when you look at it funny." Peterson shook his head in amazement. Human engineers couldn't look at broken alien technology without fixing it, even when they were supposed to be conquering the people who built it. It was probably a character flaw, but it was their character flaw. "Colonel," came another report, "the Vorthak civilians are requesting permission to surrender directly to human forces. Apparently they've heard we provide better medical care than their own military." Peterson sighed. This was the problem with fighting a species that had never encountered humans before. They expected conquerors to act like conquerors, not like social workers with military training. "Grant the requests," he ordered, "and make sure our medics have enough supplies. We're apparently running a refugee operation now." By the end of the month, the Vorthak hegemony had ceased to exist as a military power, replaced by what humanity diplomatically termed a supervised transition government. The Vorthak military had been disbanded, their weapons technology confiscated, and their former leaders enrolled in a mandatory course on galactic humanitarian law. The rest of the galaxy was taking notes, and most of them were concluding that picking fights with human rescue workers was probably not a career-enhancing move. 6 months after the Vorthak made the mistake of shooting at human rescue workers, Captain Tank Rodriguez was back where he belonged, commanding a rescue mission. The difference was that this time, when the Mercy's hand dropped out of hyperspace over the disaster zone, she was accompanied by the heavy cruiser Just Cause, 2 destroyers, and a squadron of fighters flown by pilots who were still slightly disappointed that nobody had tried to interfere with their rescue operations. "Captain," Patches announced from her medical station, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who was finally able to do her job without being shot at. "I'm reading approximately 15,000 civilians in need of evacuation from the mining disaster on Kepler 7. Standard humanitarian crisis. No military complications." Tank nodded, studying the tactical display that showed not just his rescue fleet, but also the dozen alien vessels that had volunteered to assist with the evacuation. It was amazing how helpful other species became when they understood that interfering with human rescue operations was a species-ending mistake. "Boom, boom," Tank called. "Any signs of trouble?" Tommy Nakamura looked up from his weapons console, where he was monitoring the defensive grid that now automatically surrounded every human humanitarian mission. "All quiet, Cap. Though the Regelian government sent a destroyer to provide escort services. Apparently they want to make sure everyone knows they're on our side." It was funny how the galaxy's perspective on human rescue operations had changed. Before the Vorthak incident, most species had viewed Earth's humanitarian workers as naive idealists playing at galactic politics. Now, those same rescue ships were treated with the kind of respect usually reserved for dreadnought fleets. "Sir." And then loss. The communications officer reported, "We're receiving priority messages from 17 different governments offering assistance with the evacuation. The Centauri Federation is offering medical supplies. The Altair Republic wants to provide transport ships, and pretty much everyone wants to help." Tank smiled. It was the kind of smile that had once made Vorthak admirals nervous, but now it was just satisfaction at a job well done. "Accept all offers, and make sure to thank them for their cooperation in maintaining galactic humanitarian standards. The rescue operation proceeded with the kind of smooth efficiency that only came when everyone involved understood the consequences of interference. The mining disaster was contained, the civilians were evacuated, and not a single shot was fired in anger. It was exactly the kind of boring, successful mission that Tank had always preferred. In the ship's recreation area, the crew was watching news reports from the former Vorthak space, now officially known as the Vorthak Rehabilitation Zone. The reports showed Vorthak children attending schools built by human engineers, Vorthak hospitals staffed by human medical volunteers, and Vorthak agricultural projects managed by human agricultural specialists. "You know what's really funny?" Patches commented, watching footage of human doctors training Vorthak medical students. "We ended up doing more good for the Vorthak as we conquered them than they ever did for themselves." Wrench laughed from her position at the engineering console. "Aye, that's humans for you. We can't even conquer someone properly without accidentally improving their lives." Tank nodded, thinking about the reports he'd been reading. The former Vorthak hegemony was experiencing unprecedented prosperity under human supervision. Their industrial capacity had doubled, their medical system had been completely rebuilt, and their crime rate had plummeted. It turned out that humans were better at running the Vorthak government than the Vorthak had been. "Captain," the tactical officer announced, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Cross." "Put her through," Tank ordered. The Admiral's face appeared on the main screen, wearing the expression of someone who had just received very good news. "Captain Rodriguez, I wanted to personally inform you that the Galactic Council has officially adopted the Terran humanitarian protocols as mandatory galactic law. Any interference with rescue operations is now considered an act of war against the entire galactic community." Tank raised an eyebrow. "And how did they reach that decision so quickly?" Admiral Cross's smile was absolutely terrifying. "Well, after we finished explaining the consequences of the Vorthak incident to the other council members, they seemed very enthusiastic about protecting humanitarian workers. Funny how educational a good example can be." The transmission ended, and Tank turned back to his crew. They were all grinning with the satisfaction of people who had changed the galaxy for the better, even if they'd had to break a few things in the process. "All right, people," Tank announced. "Let's finish up here and see if anyone else needs rescuing. And remember, we're representing Earth out here." "Sir," Boom Boom asked with exaggerated innocence, "what if someone interferes with our mission?" Tank's smile was gentle, almost paternal. "Tommy, I don't think that's going to be a problem anymore. Word gets around, and the galaxy has learned that there's a difference between civilization and pacifism." The Mercy's hand completed her mission and jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the next crisis that needed human attention. Behind them, the rescued civilians were already spreading the word about human efficiency and kindness. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited with the kind of respectful attention that came from understanding exactly what happened to people who shot at rescue workers. Humanity had taught the galaxy an important lesson. We were happy to save lives, protect the innocent, and provide humanitarian aid to anyone who needed it. But if someone wanted to interfere with that mission, they would discover why Earth's rescue workers were protected by the most creative and motivated military in known space. It was a lesson the galaxy wouldn't forget, and Captain Tank Rodriguez couldn't help but think that was exactly how it should be.